It is important to understand that revolution doesn't exist without us. It doesn't exist without Black and brown, queer, poor, broke, or ratchet sex workers. We are not obligated to subscribe to ideas of unity that erase us, that harm us.
Now, whether you know it or not, the female spider is a half-blind savage carnivore who will eat any insect she can get a hold of, including the male of her own species. Quite obviously, this makes life a rather perilous business for the male spider, especially if he happens to have licentious tendencies.
My name is Erica. I am 31. Okay. My name is Erica. I'm 31. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. I graduated high school and went to college in Southern Indiana, and I've lived in Chicago for about 12 years. I got into sex work when I was a college student. I was 20, going on 21. I was a dance teacher at the time. I was struggling to make ends meet. I was working 3 jobs, and a buddy of mine suggested that I exotic dance. She said it was more money involved, so I did that and stripping for my second year of school so I could go back to school. I couldn't afford my tuition anymore, or room and board, or food. My first roommate I had was that year, I believe, and we were evicted. It was the first eviction I ever had. So kind of ruined our friendship for one. Left me in a position where I had to figure out where I was going to live and what I was going to do. I was kind of the problem child coming up, so I didn't really have as many options as my siblings did. But that was the choice I made, was to get into dancing so I could go back to school. One, you're seeing a hell of a lot more protests and rallies and strikes, which early 2000s, maybe late 90s we saw here and there, mostly out west, but we're starting to see it out east. You have the New York stripper strike that's going on. That's been going on for a little minute, where Black and brown exotic dancers, they're really fed up with colorism within those spaces and who gets hired and for what. And you see this down south in Louisiana and New Orleans with all these raids that are going on, which forces sex workers to kind of fight back. I mean, what do you do if you're being raided every weekend, or you're being raided so often, and then on top of that, if you're a more marginalized sex worker, it probably happens a hell of a lot more. We see that here in Chicago. The clubs out south are raided, shut down more than the ones within city limits that are downtown or north of downtown. So you have places like VIP's or Pink Monkey, which stays open, and then you have places out south like Arnie's or Skybox, which they have to change their name often, or they're constantly being raided by excise. You have sort of this boom in just work, period, artistic work and expression around sex work and sex workers' rights. You're seeing a lot more online conversations, and in recent years, you're seeing more sex workers lobbying, and you're seeing sex workers go to Washington, D.C. to actually talk to politicians or to say, hey, we're very capable of understanding law and legislation and what's being passed or what's being thought about and how it affects us, and we're part of this conversation too, which I think is really important. A lot more authors and writers and people organizing protests, but you have SESTA, you have FOSTA, you have,
what those are?
yeah, you have, give me a second, I gotta break down each one of these syllables, and there's so many. There's SESTA, FOSTA, In Banking for Human Traffickers Act, and then you have loitering ordinances, depending on what area you're talking about. But SESTA is, give me a second, I'm sorry. Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act, and then FOSTA has more to do with, I'm sorry if I can't remember which all the initials stand for, but I know FOSTA has more to do with, SESTA and FOSTA have to do with the accountability that websites take as far as posting certain types of content, or as far as sex workers being able to advertise their services, should even share their opinions about sex work or use the term sex work or escort or, you know, whatever that would be connected to that would be a red flag. It removes the ability for these third-party sites to be able to have these things posted without being sued. Now that that's taken that out of the way, you have, you know, sites like Backpage and trying to think of more escort-friendly sites where it's escort only, and you can also review who you're going to see, and you can also leave reviews for clients. You're seeing that being removed. A lot of payment apps and banks have been affected by this. Their relationships with sex workers, which was already in a shaky place to begin with. Like Green Dot was the first one I saw years ago before FOSTA and SESTA came up, where sex workers were like, okay, they're not dealing with us. Then it was, you know, these prepaid debit card companies. Then it was just banks in general. A lot of them get to hang on the fact that they're either Christian or family, you know, family values is their core focus, their center. And so this goes against that. But you have the In Banking for Human Traffickers Act, which affects finances as well. And then all of these say trafficking in them. But people always conflate the two, trafficking and sex work, and then not understanding the gray areas in between. And so it's kind of this overlap where you might be seeing results in a particular area, which really isn't happening because, you know, it takes away your ability to be able to communicate that you're in danger if certain keywords mean that it's a red flag for you to post them. So how do you reach out if you're in a dangerous situation, like I mentioned before, where you have a pimp and you can't reach out to someone, or you have internet access for this amount of time, or maybe your phone is off and you only have internet access when you're at work and there's Wi-Fi, or the only people that you're close to or who understand what you're going through and might be able to provide you with some assistance without judgment or further harm would be people who are in your industry or people who have dealt with the same things. But you see a lot of sex workers who are combating that, who are explaining that trafficking and sex work are two completely different things. And then with these laws and with this particular legislation, it doesn't separate the two. So it affects sex workers who are working consensually, and then it also puts people who are being trafficked in harm's way. It takes away their ability to speak out, and then sounds messed up, but if you're in a scenario where, you know, you're dealing with someone who's harmful towards you, underage or not, consensual or being trafficked, how much more danger are you being put in if they're taking away your ability to provide, right? So if you're being trafficked and you're expected to bring home a certain amount of money and you can't do that, that doesn't really help. You know what I'm saying? Like there are no solutions being offered outside of saying this is now illegal or this is a problem. There's nothing being set up for actual victims of trafficking for them to be able to combat what they've experienced or what they've gone through, unless you're seeking out grassroots type of organizations, unless you're seeking out, these organizations that center, trauma care, post-trauma care, and they're ran by people who've been through this or who understand it in a way where sex workers aren't necessarily the villain here. It's more so law and legislation and law enforcement and people who are enforcing these laws. But there are a hell of a lot of protests going on and movements and demonstrations, which reminds me of what we saw like in early 2000s when we saw like the first little bursts of that. You saw, especially out west, what was it, the Lusty Lady, I believe? They were considered like this feminist hub for sex workers, and they're no longer existent, but they were made into a co-op their last few years, and because of the strike that they had, because of how they fought against legislation in that area.
Formative allyship and the commodification of activism within the sex work advocacy circle has allowed very white and very privileged laborers of the adult industry to center themselves in conversations about our rights, in our literature, in film that show us back reflections of ourselves, and so on. This pushes more marginalized sex workers to the back. This isn't radical, it doesn't reduce harm, and it damn sure ain't helpful. What happens to the narratives and the stories of Black and brown sex workers when they're constantly pushed to the back, when they are constantly silenced and erased? What happens to a movement when the very people on the front lines every time are ostracized, treated as less than human, less deserving of basic human rights or understanding?
A common myth about providers I would like to dispel is that the game wasn't worth it. Being a sex worker wasn't worth it if we hadn't obtained certain types of material goods or a certain type of clothing. We're not living in luxury. We're not being paid X amount of dollars a rip, that it's not worth it. I see that a lot in documentaries, even from sex workers themselves, saying that, if you're driving, insert whatever vehicle is laugh worthy here, that, what are you coming to the club for? What are you, selling all of this for? What are you doing porn for if you can't, stun on a couple of motherfuckers in designer clothing or, show up to your high school reunion in a much better whip than everybody else? But there are sex workers who are living paycheck to paycheck just like everybody else. There are sex workers who are on the street. There are sex workers who are in between homes and crashing on couches. There are sex workers who are none of those things, and they just have a normal, as normal as it can be, financial security. Maybe they're not well off, but they're able to take care of their bills and what they need to, and have a little bit left over to go have dinner with a friend. But there's our jobs still matter. Our success in a way isn't reliant on how much money we're bringing in or what we own. I think that, like when you get into the territory of consulting businesses and stuff like that, I think that has some weight, and I understand why it does. But outside of that, I don't see why that's such a central focus. I don't have a whip. I'm on the train. I'm okay with that. The assumption that we're living in luxury or that we have to be for this to be worth it probably that competition makes it impossible for us to get along or develop friendships or really be there for one another, even within like workspaces. And I'd say another thing that in documentaries about sex work I dislike, there are never any black women. There are never any black women. There are never any black women. And when there are, there's maybe 1 to 2. They have to present femininity a certain way. We're not discussing race nearly enough and how that affects these conversations, how that affects sex workers' rights, the safety of sex workers, and so on, in documentaries about adult entertainment laborers of the desire industry. We're not discussing marginalized identity enough. It's always the same white faces. It's a lot of I get that like sex work is an umbrella term. It's supposed to include escorts and phone sex operators and doms and webcam models and strippers and sugar babies and all of these other lanes, but too often in documentaries it is, people who do porn, people who do webcam work only, people who are doms. Those are usually the centers of the conversation. Very rarely do we get to hear from full service providers, particularly those who do street level sex work, who are in vice districts in whatever city. And when you do see documentaries about people who, make their money off the stroll, who make their money off of street level sex work, it's more so of a, from the perspective of a savior, or from the perspective of someone who's kind of looking down on them, like, oh, poor, whatever the hell. We don't discuss parenting. I very rarely get to see parents in sex work documentaries, or what juggling that is like. I think that's it.
What's the sex work film that you want to see?
I would like to see a sex work film that starts off with the most ratchet of music and some like street scene, and then you're on a stoop, and then I don't know, something real black girlish is going on. And then from there you have, I don't know, someone telling the most amazing story, or saying something extremely funny, and then pan to a beautiful black sex worker doing some dope shit, like getting ready. And if not getting ready, having a normal conversation on speakerphone with their mom, who laughs like this. I'd like to see a sex work documentary with more black and brown faces, where queer identity is discussed, where you get to see in-depth looks into people's partnerships or their parenting, their spiritual beliefs even, if they're existent, and if not, conversations around that. The perfect sex worker documentary to me would look like a 50-50 sort of makeup of, harsh reality and things that might be a little hard for people to stomach, and then things that make you smile and laugh and feel joy. One that's inclusive of various sex workers, and not just from the perspective of one particular lane of sex work. I'd like to see a documentary where there's a stripper who's friends with a porn star who's friends with an escort, and they're all together talking about, their last shopping spree and what the hell they bought or something, or not, the realities of their job individually, and then kind of how they've connected. Maybe they have similar experiences, just in different spaces. I don't think we really get to see that perspective. It's usually,
living through porn, or woe is me on the stroll, or something along those lines. It's never like a combination of different types of sex workers, more marginalized sex workers. I want to see documentaries where black sex workers get paid for their interviews. Like, you know, like these major TV stations that make money off of these very avant-garde, you know, art, this very like different sort of, you know, piece of work that we're starting to see on TV programs. These, you know, these docuseries and documentaries that explore different things and different people and different demographics. I'd really, really like to see them compensate black sex workers for what they're recording and what they're, you know, providing in interviews, instead of just being the edgy subjects for their videos. I'd like to see that. And I'd like to see more documentaries created by sex workers. More sex workers making documentaries. That's what I would like to see. Today I choose to celebrate the labor of black sex workers who are often removed from the very movements they breathe life into. Today I celebrate sex workers of color who put in the work, whether praised or not. Today I celebrate the lives of sex workers we have lost, who are never named, never the reasons for your marches and protests, yet always the cautionary tale examples that spill from your lips in self-righteous lecture. Today, I celebrate the lives of sex workers who are still here in fear every day that will and can change in the blink of an eye.
Now, whether you know it or not, the female spider,
Today, I celebrate our narratives, our art, the work of sex workers often ignored, if not exceptional, different, or insulated and supported by the right people. Today, I celebrate sex worker solidarity and friendship. Today, I celebrate sex workers who have survived the unimaginable and who have helped others survive the same.
And in order to effect a mating and escape with his life, he has to be both ingenious and exceedingly agile. Well, what about the male human?